Susie, you're Susie?
Hi.
You know Carlos? You know Carlos? When you study the Bible, you really don't come across Baha'u'llah or the Bach, right? Whatever. You come at the end, you end with Jesus Christ, and that's the end there, right? He promised, like, the end of the system of things, right? Like this, you know how everything is, right, at the moment. But the peace that he promises through the end of all the things that is evil. The way they promise it is the way that everything will end by his, by he actually doing it, like destroying all those, destroying the world. That's what he said, right? So, and that's the problem. I need some explanation on.
It's very easy. First of all, the Armageddon in the book of Revelation, where it speaks of the Armageddon, it's in a passage, in a section where it talks of 7 last plagues. And the plagues are things like the ocean will turn to blood, rivers will turn to blood, people will die. It is explained in the Baha'i Faith that this means, it's a reference to the religious leaders, that they are the sources of the water, they are the sources of the light, of life, and that even the sources of life will turn to blood, it will turn to death. This is what happened 2,000 years ago with the Jewish religious leaders. The people who should have been the source of life were not. They should have recognized Jesus when he came, but they didn't. Because of that, they became the source of death. This is what it means. Then it goes on to talk about the coming of the kings from the east. And the kings from the east are Baha'u'llah and his family. In many places it says that when the promised one comes to Israel, he will come to Israel from the east. And Isaiah says this, and Ezekiel says this. So in the same passage where it talks about the Armageddon, it talks about the coming of the kings from the east, and it says that he will come from the land of the sun, which it is explained in the Baha'i writings, this is a reference to the country of Iran, which is where Baha'u'llah came from. The next one says that he will come from the Euphrates River, which is when Baha'u'llah was exiled. He was exiled to Baghdad, which is right next to the Euphrates River. When he revealed the hidden words, the book, it was on the Euphrates River. He used to walk beside the Euphrates and write down these things. And the next part of the book of Revelation says that he will come to the seat of the beast, God.
But why it specifies a number, like 144,000?
Okay. It's 144,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel. What is interesting is after the 6th century BC, which is 600 years before the book was written, there were only 2 tribes left. When the Jews were taken captive into Babylon, 10 of the tribes were lost. So from that time on, the nation of Israel and the 10 tribes ceased to exist. One explanation I have heard of the 144,000 is that the numbers in the book of Revelation are very significant. And if you add the numbers together, 1, 4, 4, 0, 0, 0, 0, it adds up to 9. And 9 is a symbolic number of the name of Baha, which is it's a symbol of Baha'u'llah. Another number that appears repeatedly is 1260. If you add the numbers together, 1 plus 2 plus 6 plus 0, it's a 9. It's foretelling the coming of Baha'u'llah again. But what I wanted to show you, this is even more important than what you're talking about. This is the book of Revelation, and it says, talking about the temple in Jerusalem. It says, measure the temple in Jerusalem and the people that are inside to see how they're doing, to see if they've remained faithful. And then it says, the Gentiles, who are the non-Jewish people, the city will be given to the Gentiles, and they will tread it under their feet. They'll walk on it for 42 months. Now, you figure out 42 months, there are 30 days in a month, it's 1,260 days. So here it says 42 months, which is 1,260 days. So there'll be a conflict. And talks again about her going into the wilderness, this time for a time, times, and half a time. This is 3.5 years. 3.5 years is 1,260 days. So they're saying the same number over and over and over again.
What does this one mean?
Okay, let me explain what that means. So here again, 42 months is 1,260 days. 7 times it gives the number 1,260. This is very important. And it talks about the beast coming. So who is the beast? In the book of Revelation in the 17th chapter, let's see if I've got this here. Okay. In the book of Revelation in the 7th chapter, the apostle... 17th chapter. In the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation, the apostle John is speaking. So let's draw a little graph here. This is history. So right here is when Jesus lived, this period right here. And John wrote the book of Revelation. And in the 17th chapter of John, he speaks of the beast who was, the beast who is, and the beast who is yet to arise. Now if you look at the book of Daniel, Daniel also talks about these beasts who are supposed to appear. Beast. Daniel talks about them, and he identifies them as the empires who had conquered Jerusalem. So going back here about 600 years before Jesus was born, about here, you had a foreign empire come in, and for the first time since Moses appeared, Assyria conquered Jerusalem, and it took the king off into captivity in chains. And that's when Israel as a nation ceased to exist. It's actually 676 BC. Okay, then after the Assyrians, another empire arose who conquered the Assyrians, and they also conquered Jerusalem. It was Babylon. After Babylon, another empire arose to conquer Babylon, and that was Persia. And after Persia, another empire arose and conquered Persia. That was Greece. And Daniel, the book of Daniel, identifies these empires as beasts, like an animal. Okay, so John, speaking here in the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation, talks about the beast who was, or in his time, the beast in the past. Then he speaks of the beast who is. And in John's day, another empire had arisen to conquer Jerusalem, and that was Rome. So he talks of the beast who was, these empires. He talks of the beast who is, this empire. Then he speaks of another beast who is yet to arise. It hasn't come yet. Only one other empire arose after Rome to conquer Jerusalem, and that was the Islamic Empire. It was a corrupted empire. Well, I don't want to go too much into that. Jesus, in the book of Revelation, said, the book of Revelation, these are things which are soon to happen. So the book of Revelation are things which are going to happen after the time of Jesus. The beast who is to appear is the one who is described in here, who is given power for 1,260 days. In the book of Ezekiel and in the book of Numbers, it says that days can equal years in prophecy. For example, the one said, 40 days have I been grieved with this generation. I have appointed you each day for a year, even 40 years. So he says, first place it says 40 days, then it says days can equal years, then it says 40 years. So using the same principle here, that 1,260 days can actually be 1,260 years. What John is saying here is this last beast will have power, will exercise power for 1,260 years. Okay? If you look at the calendar that is used by the Islamic people, the year 1260 is the year 1844. So in the Christian calendar, this is the year 1844. In the calendar that is used in the religion of Islam, the same year 1260 of their calendar, it's the same year. So what the prophecy is saying is the last beast will exercise control until the year 1844, at which time the man-child who is to rule all nations will come. The man-child who is to rule all nations referred to here is the Bab. The Bab appeared in 1844. Okay, now keep in mind that this 1260 prophecy appears 7 times. So it's 7 prophecies that point to the same year. Now, if you go to the religion of Islam, Baha'u'llah says that the religion of Islam, whose founder was named Muhammad, that he said it was a true religion and truly was from God, but very shortly after Muhammad died, a rival family came in that all point to the same year. So it's 7 here, 5 here. In the 24th chapter of Matthew, Jesus answers his disciples. They asked him, when will the presence of God return, and when will we have a new age? And Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation foretold by Daniel the prophet. If you look at the abomination of desolation passage in Daniel, the number associated with that is 2,300 days. And as we know, days can equal years in prophecy, so we'll make that 2,300 years. The question is, when does this begin? Okay. Just a little bit beyond this, and I can show you this. To restore and to rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, then shall Messiah be cut off. Okay. 70 weeks are appointed from the date of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, then shall Messiah be cut off. So what happened back here, these empires that conquered Jerusalem destroyed it. And during the Persian captivity here, when Persia was in control, the king of Persia, his personal servant was a guy from Israel. He was Jewish. Of desolation. And he says, and what is appointed is 2,300 days, which is 2,300 days. And days can equal years in prophecy. So what you do is you start here at the same time point that you started the other prophecy. Count forward 2,300 years. It gives you 1844. So that's another one. 7 here, 5 here, another one here. That's 12, that's 13 so far. So there's another prophecy from another religion, from the Zoroastrian religion.
But what do you think about the war then? Do you think that will occur?
The war, it's not the war. Armageddon is not a war.
Okay, how about what it talks about? It really it's not a war, but it's the conclusion of the things, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well, what Armageddon is talking about is talking about the coming of Baha'u'llah.
Yeah, it's like the conclusion of the system.
Yeah.
But then it also speaks about the destruction really of those that are destroying the earth. What do you think about that?
I think that you have to be very careful when interpreting Bible prophecy and to look at the examples of how Bible prophecy was fulfilled in the past. The exact same promises were given about Jesus 2,000 years ago. Let me show you one. Okay. In the Old Testament, the book of 2 Kings, it says that Elijah the prophet was taken up into heaven. Okay. Over here it says that there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. So the Jewish people knew this. They knew that Elijah had been taken up into heaven in a chariot of fire. Over here in Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament, it says that before the great and dreadful day of the Lord comes, I will send you Elijah the prophet. It says that Elijah the prophet will come back from heaven first. Now the Jewish people knew this. What this is talking about is before Christ is going to come, Elijah has to return from heaven first. So the Jewish people, when Jesus said that he was the Messiah, they said, well, wait a second, we haven't seen Elijah come down from heaven. And everybody said, yeah, they're right. Jesus couldn't be the Christ because nobody's seen Elijah come back. But Jesus explained that the prophecy was true, but that it had already been fulfilled. Here. His disciples this is in the New Testament, Matthew now. His disciples asked him, why did the rabbis and the scribes say that Elijah's got to come first before the Christ appears? And Jesus answered and says, it's true that Elijah truly must first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elijah has returned already. But they knew him not. Peter's writings, Peter only mentions one other person in his writings. And Peter says, Peter knew that Christians were going to be going through a tough time, and he knew that they were probably going to lose their way, lose their path, just like the Jewish people had, and the Jewish people rejected Jesus. Peter said the same thing, that the Christian people will also lose their way, and they also will reject the return of Christ when he comes. I should have told you. What he said is Israel had false prophets as well as true. This is Peter saying this. He says, and you Christians likewise will have false teachers among you. Let's hear. Anyway, he says, Israel had false prophets, and you Christians will have false prophets too. He says they will introduce damnable heresies into Christianity, which will cause the Christians to go off of the true path. And then he warns that because of this, Christianity is going to have to go through fire. And it's the same fire referred to in Malachi. It's a symbolic fire, a purification. They're going to have to be purified. As John the Baptist spoke of the baptism of fire, which is a purification. The teachers are going to have to be purified. So Peter says you have to go through this, and then he said, one thing will prevent you from going off the true path. And he said, turn to the writings of the Apostle Paul. And Peter, referring to Paul, said that Paul's writings contain some obscure passages which ignorant and unstable people, Christians, misinterpret to their own ruin. So Peter was saying that Christians were already misinterpreting Paul's writings. Now the question I ask people who think that all this is literal, how can you misinterpret something that's literal? Well, the Apostle Paul said these things. The Apostle Paul right here says, we speak not in words taught us by human wisdom, but in words taught us by the Spirit, expressing spiritual truths in spiritual words. So he's talking about spiritual things, and he's using spiritual ideas to illustrate them. It says the man without this spiritual perspective can't understand the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him. He cannot understand them because they must be spiritually discerned. So he's speaking of spiritual things, using spiritual words, and they must be spiritually discerned. Now, if Jesus appointed Peter as the head of his church, and if Peter appointed Paul's writings, he says, turn to Paul's writings for the truth. What did they actually say about resurrection? If you look at the Old Testament first, it says, in Ecclesiastes, it says, Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return to God who gave it. So it says the body, the dust, will go back to the earth, the spirit goes to heaven. Okay?
What some religion believes as the spirit going to heaven is that because in some passages of the Bible it says that who have ever seen the spirit of man ascend or the spirit of the animal descend, right?
Mm-hmm.
So actually what they believe is that like what one of the prophets said, right? Remember me when I go down to the grave, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they what